Good morning. Welcome to episode 75 of the Driller Newscast, a weekly update on the news and stories impacting the water well and industrial drilling industry. I'm your host, Brock Yordy. This week in the news, we'll start with the Department of Interior's new measures to enhance worker safety and ensure offshore oil and gas operations on the outer continental shelf are conducted with the utmost safety and oversight standards. That's right. We now have a final well control rule which has been released by the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement. Next, we'll jump to North Dakota and a federal whistleblower retaliation on water quality results. This week's feature, we'll talk about professional presence in the field. But before we hit this great news and feature, let's talk some safety. For this week in safety, we got a short week. We just had a great Labor Day weekend. Working individuals holiday. We relaxed, we recharged, we got a big push. Next thing you know, it's going to be Halloween, it's going to be Thanksgiving, and then we're going to be at the National Groundwater IGSPA show in Vegas, and the year is going to be over. But how are we matching up right now, coming into the last 3 months of the year when it comes to safety? I've thrown up a chart of drilling lost time injuries. It's very similar to the construction lost time injuries, but I want you to go ahead and take a look at what makes up 53.7% of our injuries in our industry. Let's start with struck by objects. What do you think of with struck by objects on a drilling project? No, it's not that 18-inch pipe wrench being thrown by the driller at the assistant who is sitting on the edge of the pipe rack texting his girlfriend on the phone. Actually, comes to right here. Our number one struck by objects happens to be eye injuries from us not wearing our safety glasses properly or not having them at all. And I want you to think about how often they're in our pocket or laying on the dash or not being used. But with all of that rolling, crushing, spinning, reciprocating equipment we got going on, we need to make sure we have proper ANSI-certified safety glasses. Next, let's talk about caught in an object. Got a lot of moving parts. We got suspended loads. We got plenty of tables being opened and tools being lifted and lowered. And where are our hands? First and foremost, yes, we need gloves and we need to think about that 2 thumbs up for hand safety. But really, we need to think about where we're placing these hands in the danger zones. And again, veterans in the field, how are we treating these jobs with our helpers? I'm going to stop that right there. With our assistants, with our assistant drillers, with our field technicians. Let's get rid of this term helper. And it's been such tribal for us. We just continue to say it, but we got to have everybody's back. And it doesn't feel like any milestone at all when I come across and I say I'm a helper. So back to being professionals. Where are our hands placements? Where are our danger zones? Let's talk about them. Let's stop work authority. Let's have big discussions. Let's get our hands out of danger zones, along with any other type of thing that we can get caught in between. Talked about a lot this year, overexertion, and we can see this with the extreme heat. We can see it with the mud that we're having from the floods and stuff. There's plenty of places that we're overexerting ourselves. And this is going to become a much bigger piece of our pie because we just don't think about repetitive stress injuries. We don't think about back injuries enough, neck injuries, all the things that come, knees, hips. And really, we need to get better about thinking about, at the end of the day, why am I sore? What could I have done to prevent myself from being that sore? It's not that I just worked really hard and I worked harder than everybody else. We need to be able to put in an effective 40-hour work week that is good and productive, that allows us to have that great holiday weekend or that great evening watching flag football with our children, whatever's going on. This is no longer the industry that we need to go home and go, we just worked harder than everybody else and that's why we're sore. This whole concept of this is a young individual's game is a joke. We have manipulated that concept for wanting young backs and necks and shoulders that haven't started to be ruined by poor lifting, poor ergonomics, along with non-commitment to knowing I can just spend the night on the couch because I don't have a family that I need to take care of. We need to do a better job of taking care of our people. Again, we need to look at falls and struck against objects, our exposure to harmful substances. We've talked a lot about that, our slips, trips, and falls, and everything else that impacts our project. I've got a short week. I want you to take 5 minutes when we go over that safety brief Tuesday morning. And I want you to say, hey, let's get everybody's head in the game. Like I've said several years in a row, we just had a great holiday weekend and we got a big push to the end of the year. Days are going to get shorter. We're going to have animal movements. We have kids back to school. There's lots of things we need to be looking out for. I want you to go out and be safe and think about this chart. Be safe. For this week in the news, we're going to jump to the Department of Interior that last week announced new measures to enhance worker safety and ensure offshore oil and gas operations on the outer continental shelf are conducted with the utmost safety and oversight standards. This is coming after the Deepwater Horizon Macondo well tragic incident. I remember working in the corporate offices of Halliburton when this happened, same time as the Chilean miners getting trapped. So those miners are dead, but we'll have this well shut in fast. And we saw how that flipped. The final well control rule from the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement builds upon the historic regulatory reforms implemented by the department in the aftermath of the 2010 Deepwater Horizon explosions and resulting oil spill that killed 11 people and caused billions of dollars in environmental damage and economic loss to the coastal communities. The Biden-Harris administration is committed to the highest standards of worker safety and environmental protections. This comes from Secretary Deb Haaland. We hear a lot from her. These improvements are necessary to ensure offshore operations, especially those related to well integrity and blowout prevention, and are based on the best available sound science. As our nation transitions to a clean energy economy, we will continue strengthening and modernizing offshore energy standards and oversight. Again, we can only have a clean energy economy by having seamless marriage with our oil and gas industry and being able to understand how we use those together. We can't get rid of one or the other. We both need those. And we saw that last week with our discussion on net zero and the importance of what's happening with climate change. Finalizing this rule will enable the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement to continue to put lives and livelihood of workers first, as well as the protection of our waters and marine habitats. That came from Director Kevin Sly. This rule strengthens testing and performance requirements for blowout preventers and other well control equipment. It provides for timely and robust analysis and investigations into failures and clarifies reporting requirements to ensure we have appropriate visibility over information and data critical to maintaining well integrity. In the immediate aftermath of the Deepwater Horizon incident, the Bureau of Safety adopted several recommendations from multiple investigation teams to improve the safety of offshore energy operations, leading to the publication of the 2016 Well Control Rule. In May 2019, the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement published a final rule that weakened certain safety provisions. Today, final rule incorporates key lessons learned from operators' experience, incident data regarding blowout preventers, and well integrity since the publication of the 2016 rule, and revises or rescinds certain modifications that were made in the 2019 rule. Remember, we had that 2019 rule come out, and it just wasn't what we needed, and it was just the current administration thinking that we had overstepped our boundaries. But I want you to remember, we're at $17.5 billion worth of damage, 11 individuals dead, and 87 days is what it took to plug that well. We have no idea what the real amount of damage was done, or the fact that we didn't even recover as much crude that had gone out. Back to the statement. The department has finalized revisions that will require blowout preventer systems to be able to always close and seal the wellbore to well's maximum anticipated surface pressure, except as otherwise specified in the blowout prevention systems requirements section of the regulations. They require failure data to be reported to both a designated third party and the Bureau of Safety. It requires failure analysis and investigation to start within 90 days of an incident. It requires an independent third-party qualification to be submitted to the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement with the associated permit applications. This specifies that blowout preventers on existing floating facilities must follow the dual shear ram requirements when replacing an entire BOP stack. It also requires that remotely operated vehicles be capable of opening and closing each shear ram on a BOP. Remember, we couldn't get this shut in. And then they went back and realized they had seen pieces of the rubber come across the shaker screens. This is the bigger piece of this entire situation. It also requires the operator to provide BOP test results to the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement within 72 hours after completion of a test. If officials from the Bureau of Safety are unable to witness the testing, they will provide that data. Deepwater Horizon happened April 20th, 2010. That's when the explosion on the Deepwater Horizon Macondo well platform started the largest marine oil spill in U.S. history. For 87 days, the explosion, the well blasted oil and natural gas continually and uncontrollably into the northern Gulf of Mexico. The explosion killed 11 individuals, spilled over 3.19 million barrels, and did right now today, as we have decided, 17.2 billion in damages. This is a big deal that's come out. It also shows that we have a commitment to continue our offshore drilling. I think it's a great job. For our second news story of the week, I want to talk about the importance of integrity in our industry as groundwater professionals, as drilling professionals, and quality data and reporting as it is supposed to be done. And sometimes there's situations, and we're going to see this with the North Dakota DEQ, where individuals step up and say, hey, what was reported was inaccurate or was downgraded. And we do this in health and safety and environment because we are protected by OSHA and the federal whistleblower program. And whistleblowing protection is for criminal offenses, for regulatory breaches in health and safety, including environmental breaches or cover-ups. And as we see, this whistleblower investigation found that employees' contact with a federal agency was protected. A federal whistleblower investigation has found the North Dakota Department of Environmental Quality illegally retaliated against an environmental scientist after they reported safety concerns about the public water system to management and later contacted the United States Environmental Protection Agency. We got a ton of forever chemicals and Gen X and nitrates and lead, and we have to have integrity on these things, no different than how we report proper construction and grouting practices and water quality data, pumping data, drought samples. There's plenty of things out there that we as an industry need to be doing, and we have to be doing it right if we want to continue to have the ability to grow our industry and be parts of all these pieces. And we saw it with the Department of Interior and the more strict rules that came from the Deepwater Horizon well. So the U.S. Department of Labor, Occupational Safety and Health Administration OSHA determined that the DEQ's actions violated federal laws that protect employees who share water safety information and ordered the department to remove the written reprimand from the employee's personal file. OSHA investigators learned that the employee who had worked for the agency for more than 7 years raised safety concerns to their supervisor over a 6-month period and then alerted the EPA about defects in reporting and data collection and concerns that sanitary violations were being downgraded to minor violations. I know that we work in many different factors in this industry, and we get upset when we say it's black and white, and then there's a gray area and whatnot. But as we can see, as we go into this story and we look at municipalities across the country, water quality data and these type of violations from minor to sanitary are very important. The supervisor requested the employee stop communicating with the EPA, and on July 1st, 2022, issued him a written reprimand for contacting the Environmental Protection Agency. This is the statement. Employees have the right to report potential violations related to safe drinking water, and it's illegal for employers to retaliate against those who do. This is from OSHA Regional Administrator Jennifer S. Rouse in Denver. Our investigation and actions on the scientist's behalf for the U.S. Department of Labor determined to make sure workers' rights are protected. Based in Bismarck, North Dakota, the Department of Environmental Quality is tasked with protecting the state's air and water resources. The department and the employee may file objections or request a hearing within 30 days to the Office of Administrative Law. And this is, again, because we have to understand all sides of the story. OSHA enforces whistleblower provisions for the Safe Drinking Water Act and more than 20 other statutes protecting employees who report violations of various workplace safety and health, including the airlines, commercial motor carriers, consumer products, environmental, financial reform, food safety, health insurance reform, motor vehicle safety, nuclear, pipeline, public transportation agencies, the railroad, maritime, securities, tax, criminal, antitrust, and anti-money laundering laws. For more information on whistleblower protections, visit OSHA's Whistleblower Protection Program page. Why did we just go over that? Because we've talked a lot about the flip we'll see in employment from now to 2030, that 45% of our groundwater professionals, our water and wastewater operating professionals will be retired. And we've done a lot from how reporting started in paper to email to the quality of tests we take. And now we're starting to look at these very small parts per trillion situations of what water quality. And tomorrow is National Groundwater Day by the National Groundwater Association, which encourages all private well owners to go and get tested, make sure that you're having regular well inspections. And so we have this big dichotomy right now about private water wells versus municipal systems and what's a safer system. And I'm going to tell you that our federal water infrastructure, our state water infrastructure, our wastewater is over 100 years old. And I keep saying this. Why? Because we have all of this PFAS legislation occurring right now. And 3M is fighting back, and 3M has stepped up and said, you know what, we recognize what has happened, and we'd like to settle for $10 billion. And as we see that, we look at our municipalities and the cost it's going to be in order to test, remove, treat, get rid of those solids. It's a big deal. So as we see all of this going on right now, there's 22 state attorney generals pursuing the halt of that $10 billion settlement. And again, it's because our operations are very old and we haven't invested. And that's why we have the federal infrastructure law right now, investing in rebuilding our water and wastewater infrastructure and our pipelines. And we can see how quickly we can have a Flint water crisis happen. And on top of that, we're not currently staffed or prepared to handle the expectations of the testing and quality assurance. And that's what's the important piece of the federal whistleblower program. If I want to put this into a greater perspective, many states right now are pushing back on our 4 parts per trillion EPA ruling on drinking water and where that's going to go. And we see the statements. And earlier this summer, we had the Conference of the Mayors, who directed a letter to the EPA stating that the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, CERCLA, we hear that a lot, CERCLA. That is, how do we pay for this? Mind you, we haven't been increasing water bills. One, because we look at what happened in Detroit and the increase in water to be able to rebuild that water infrastructure, and folks stopped paying. We see in the state of California, let's reduce water. We can do it by 10%. We can do it by 20%. They do it again, and suddenly municipalities are going, wait, our entire budget is based on this much consumption of water from our users to have these bills. So this is a big burden. And what the pushback is right now, and we just saw it in the state of Michigan, we've seen the state of Massachusetts come back and say, hey, we've been regulating PFAS for years now, Connecticut. And if we hit this 4 parts per trillion, where we're going with this, there isn't enough money. And so the big push right now is that, like the state of Michigan didn't take into account what the cost would be. They're saying to the EPA, you are underestimating what the national burden of drinking water treatment for PFAS. And if we look at a study from Black and Veatch and the AWWA, they believe it'll be upwards of $50 billion over the next 2 decades. And then we get punched right in the mouth with this. This would drive water rates up even higher, and rates increases would be felt most by low-income populations. So here's the question as we look at this, and we've designated that 4 parts per trillion can still impact people. No different than when we went to 10 parts per million for nitrates. Who was it going to impact? The developing young and the elderly. We have to really think about the impact of what is going to happen here. And since we haven't been able to come to terms with this federally yet, we just saw last week in Michigan, the Michigan Appeals Court favored 2-1 for 3M, stating that Michigan's Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy did not follow proper procedure when it put its limits to the amount of PFAS in drinking water. Mind you, as we were waiting in 2020 to see where this was going, as we're seeing the suits laid out, many states across the country put in what they believed the right limits were, waiting to see where we would go next. And we saw in Wisconsin and we saw in Minnesota overturns. We saw point of entry systems. We see USDA funding to protect this at homeowners as pipelines push out. 3M sued in this suit, with their primary argument being that Michigan Eagle violated the Administrative Procedures Act in making the rule because it did not properly account for all costs to business. They just attempted, as it may go through or it may not, a $10 billion settlement for 3M. And we saw DuPont settle for $1.8 billion. Of course, they want to settle right now. We talked earlier in the day here about the $17.5 billion in damages to the Deepwater Horizon incident, which is still ongoing, and we don't know what the cost is there. We don't know what the cost is here. But with 3M claiming that Eagle should have considered the additional cost for business to comply with cleaning up groundwater that was contaminated by PFAS. And the argument held up because we're still on the PFAS roadmap by the EPA, which is still trying to finalize rules. And again, we see it. We got states suing the EPA over WOTUS and the Clean Water Act. And then we have those same attorney generals coming back and going, whoa, wait a minute. $10 billion isn't enough, 3M. And we feel we need more. We need more studies. We're looking at what this is going to cost. Pretty deep for us to come back from a long holiday weekend, but groundwater professionals, this is what I want you to think about right now. If I punch into the right aquifer through a good confining layer, and I've constructed a well to state regulations with all best practices in place, and we've tested it, and we encourage our homeowners to continue testing and be paying attention to their townships and their communities and what we're seeing with environmental impacts to forever chemicals and Gen X, chlorides, arsenic, nitrates. Is that as much of a responsible water system as what is feeding anywhere from 1,000 to 10,000 to 100,000 people a day? We get to advocate for what's right. And that's what I want you to think about as you start this week. And if $10 billion is really enough for all that we have with PFAS right now, or where do we go from here? Thank you for joining us for episode 75 of the Driller Newscast. It's been 75 episodes. I can't wait to hit 100. Thank you for the support. Check out thedriller.com. We have the Emerging Driller series opening up this month. We still are taking on more nominations, and we need to be celebrating those youth. In the weeks to come, I want to talk professional development. I want to talk more about what's happening in geothermal. And our groundwater is insanely important to us right now. And we need to be advocating on all levels, from mining to industrial drilling for geothermal and cathodic, to our private water wells, to our bigger irrigation wells, all that we need. And it's right there in the spotlight, and regulation and who should be entering those zones and who shouldn't. You got to be the professional that's knowledgeable and is up to speed. And we do that through our state associations. We do that through our national associations. And we do that by being the best professionals possible, using the best methods and practices at our disposal. And that's why it's important for us to be reporting properly and doing what is right. So be classy, drilling industry, and keep that integrity up. Have a safe and productive week.